All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, we're tackling Islamic finance in Malaysia.
Sounds intriguing.
We're going through the Shariah governance policy document from Bank Negara Malaysia.
So we're seeing how they ensure ethical practices within Islamic finance.
Exactly. It's fascinating how much emphasis they put on public trust right off the bat.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, look, this isn't just a tagline for us. We're serious about embedding ethical finance in every aspect.
Absolutely. And it's not just a few banks. This applies across the board. Islamic banks, Takaful operators, even the Shariah committees themselves.
It highlights how interconnected the entire Islamic financial ecosystem is.
Right. And speaking of gears turning, the document lays down the law on roles and responsibilities. First, we have the board.
You're like the overseers, ensuring everyone's playing by the rules of Sharia principles.
But they can't just call the shots as they please. The document's clear. The board has to heed the Shariah Committee's counsel.
It's like having that ethical compass guiding their decisions.
And speaking of the Shariah Committee, these aren't just folks with a casual interest in Islamic finance. These are heavy hitters.
Absolutely. We're talking top-tier scholars whose interpretations of Islamic law hold serious weight. They determine what's acceptable in this financial landscape.
It's a big responsibility. The world of finance, even Islamic finance, is complex and always changing.
Exactly, and the document gets that. That's why they mandate the Sharia Committee meets often, at least every 2 months.
To discuss these complex issues.
Precisely. These aren't just quick check-ins. These are deep dives into how modern finance aligns with ethical and religious obligations.
It's high-stakes decision-making, ensuring the system's integrity. It reminds me of the movement in general corporate governance toward integrating ethical considerations more.
Interesting parallel.
Ah.
Though this document shows how Islamic finance has been ahead of the curve, embedding these principles from the get-go.
It's baked into the DNA, and it's not just big picture stuff. It gets granular, highlighting the role of senior management, too.
Right, they're the ones turning those high-level principles into everyday actions.
So it's top-down, but with everyone playing a part in upholding Sharia compliance.
Exactly. And that's where their emphasis on checks and balances is vital. They have a system to catch potential conflicts before they become issues. That's where Sharia risk management, Sharia review, and Sharia audit come in.
Okay, now you've got me curious. What are these checks and balances? How do they work to safeguard the system?
Think of them as layers of accountability woven into these institutions. Let's start with Sharia risk management. It's like having a sixth sense for ethical dilemmas.
You're trying to spot potential conflicts before they snowball.
Exactly. It's about asking the tough questions up front, like, does this new financial product align with Sharia principles? Could this investment lead to conflicts down the road?
So instead of reacting, they're trying to anticipate and prevent.
Precisely. It's like an ethical compass guiding their every move.
That's really proactive. So if Sharia risk management is about looking ahead, what about Sharia review?
That's the ongoing internal audit, making sure operations align with Sharia principles. Think of them as the compliance guardians, diligently reviewing, scrutinizing, making sure everything is by the book.
So they're making sure things run smoothly and ethically. What do these reviews look like?
Regular, in-depth assessments. They go through every bit of the institution's operations to make sure they're compliant. And they don't just file those assessments away. They report any issues to the board, Sharia committee, and senior management.
A dedicated team to monitor the ethical heartbeat. But you mentioned a third layer, Sharia audit.
Right. That's where it gets really serious. It's the most thorough of the three. It's an independent, deep dive into the institution's entire Sharia governance framework.
It's like bringing in a specialized team, making sure those ethical considerations aren't just theoretical, but are actually shaping how the institution operates.
You got it. And it's important to remember, these Sharia committees, these ethical guardians, they aren't operating in a vacuum.
Right, they're not just scholars stuck in some ivory tower.
Exactly. The document even acknowledges that these individuals, they often have multifaceted careers navigating both the academic and professional worlds.
Wearing multiple hats. So how do they handle potential conflicts of interest then?
Well, the document tackles that head on.
Good.
It mandates that the board, they have to establish a clear written policy to identify, assess, and manage any potential conflicts of interest.
Transparency and being proactive.
You got it. They even get into specifics. For example, what happens if a Sharia committee member is approached for consultancy, right?
Okay.
But the client is also a client of the institution they advise. That's a tricky situation.
It's a tangled web, so what's the guidance there?
Transparency is key. They stress clear guidelines on disclosures and getting approvals, ensuring everything's out in the open.
So no hidden dealings.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining that public trust. When stakeholders see this commitment to transparency, it builds confidence in the system.
It's like saying, look, we're not just talking about ethics, we're living it, and you can see how. But it goes beyond just setting rules, right?
Right.
The document also emphasizes supporting and developing Shariah committee members. Why is that so important?
Well, think about it. Finance, even Islamic finance, is constantly changing.
Always evolving.
New products, market shifts, the ethical considerations, they evolve too.
So those experts need to keep up.
More than that, they need to be ahead of the curve. The document emphasizes giving these committees the tools and training to handle the ever-changing world of Islamic finance.
Sounds like intense continuing education.
It is, and it's not just about resources. It's about building a culture of continuous learning within these committees. Institutions need to invest in their Shariah committees, give them what they need to stay sharp and ahead of the game.
Makes sense. Those are the guardians of ethical conduct in a fast-paced world. But is it a one-way street? Are they just advisors? Or is there more of a back and forth with the institutions they advise?
Great question. And the document addresses that. These committees, they aren't just passive bystanders. They actively shape the ethical culture of those institutions.
So it's a two-way street.
Exactly. It's a partnership where both sides work together to uphold Shariah governance. And that ties into another key point, evaluating the Shariah Committee's performance.
So it's not a lifetime appointment, just trusting they'll uphold ethical standards without any checks.
Not at all. The document says the board is responsible for evaluating the effectiveness of the Shariah Committee, even the individual members, at least once a year.
Keeping them accountable. What do they look at in those evaluations?
It's pretty comprehensive. They're looking at things like competence, their understanding of new financial instruments, their knowledge, contributions, their ability to give sound advice, a whole picture of how effective they are.
Ensuring you've got the best people on the job. But competence and dedication aside, we have to address the elephant in the room, compensation.
Right, of course.
These individuals are dedicating their time, their expertise. How does the document approach that financial aspect of their role?
It's a crucial point. The document is clear. Shariah committee members should be fairly compensated for their expertise and their responsibilities, but it also recognizes it's a sensitive area.
Right. Got to be careful there.
They stress the need for a remuneration policy that's transparent, fair, and most importantly, aligns with those Shariah governance objectives.
Finding that balance where the compensation is fair but doesn't compromise their decision-making.
Exactly. It even suggests that the remuneration policy should consider the Shariah Committee's role in building a strong risk-aware culture within the institution.
So they're not just advisors on compliance, they're helping shape the institution's overall approach to risk.
Absolutely. The document recognizes that a strong Shariah compliance culture is key to managing risk effectively, and the Shariah Committee plays a big role in building and maintaining that culture.
Interesting. It's like ethics and risk management, which we often see as separate things, are really intertwined in Islamic finance.
You got it. This document shows how a robust ethical framework isn't just about checking boxes. It's about creating a foundation for sustainable, responsible financial practices.
A holistic approach, bringing together ethical considerations, risk management, and long-term financial stability. We've covered the principles, the roles, the checks and balances. But how does this all actually work in practice?
Let's dive into the operational side and see how these principles come to life.
So we've covered who's involved the board, Shariah committee, senior management, and why it matters aligning those financial practices with Islamic principles. Now, how does it all actually work?
That's where the document gets into the functions that make this framework tick.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly. They outline three key functions: Shariah risk management, Shariah review, and Shariah audit. A three-pronged approach to keeping things ethical.
3 lines of defense. What does Shariah risk management actually involve?
It's all about thinking ahead, spotting those potential conflicts before they even become a problem. It's about making ethical considerations part of every decision.
So instead of reacting to ethical issues, you're trying to get ahead of them, like an early warning system.
Precisely. And the document is clear about who's responsible for it. The senior officer who handles overall risk management. They're in charge of Shariah risk management too.
So it's not a separate thing, it's built into the whole approach to risk.
Exactly. It's everyone's responsibility. But someone needs to be steering the ship.
Makes sense. Okay, what about Shariah review then?
Think of that as the compliance watchdog. Shariah review makes sure all those operations and activities, they're all lining up with Shariah principles.
So Shariah risk management is scanning ahead, and Shariah review is making sure you're sailing smoothly in the present.
That's a great way to put it. They're constantly assessing, going through everything to guarantee compliance. And they don't just keep it to themselves, they report any issues they find straight to the board, the Shariah Committee, senior management.
No hiding anything.
Right.
And then there's that third layer, Shariah audit. What makes that different?
Shariah audit. That's the deep dive. The most intense of the three. It's an independent, thorough look at the whole Shariah governance framework.
So it's not just about having the policies on paper, it's making sure they're actually working as intended.
Exactly. They examine how effective the risk management is, how strong those control functions are, even the whole culture of compliance. They're checking if the institution is really walking the walk when it comes to ethical finance.
And their findings carry some weight, right?
Absolutely. Their reports go straight to the board and the Shariah Committee.
Yeah.
Total transparency. No sweeping things under the rug.
It's a way to make sure that making money never comes at the cost of ethical behavior. But with all this talk about structures and functions, it's easy to forget about the people involved.
That's a good point, and the document acknowledges that human element. It really emphasizes building a culture of Shariah compliance.
So it's not enough to just have the rules. People need to believe in them, live by them every day.
Exactly. And it starts with communication. The board has to champion those principles, make it clear that ethical conduct isn't optional, it's fundamental.
Lead by example. But it's not just what happens internally, right? There's also the public image, maintaining that trust.
Absolutely. The document stresses transparency. Both the board and the Shariah Committee have to publicly share their views on how well the institution is complying with Shariah.
No more vague statements about being committed to ethics.
Right. They have to explain how they're ensuring compliance, what challenges they face, and what steps they're taking to address any issues.
It's about showing the public that Shariah governance is more than just a set of rules. It's a commitment to doing business the right way. This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've seen how this system balances financial goals with ethical obligations.
It's a fascinating system.
It really is. But it makes you wonder, how do we know what kind of impact it's having in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Having the framework is one thing, but seeing how it influences behavior, decisions, how it affects the lives of everyday Malaysians, that's the true test.
Definitely something to think about. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. We'll keep digging into these fascinating topics, so join us again next time.